Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really important question. Um, how do we know if those investments we make to protect ourselves from risks are actually worth the cost?
And just as crucially, how do we clearly explain that value to others?
Exactly. Think of this as your guide to making smarter decisions when weighing, potential downsides against what it takes to prevent them.
Right, whether you're in a professional setting or maybe just figuring things out in your own life.
So to help us get to grips with this, we've been looking at a really insightful approach from a ManageXValue YouTube video.
Yeah, they demonstrated how their platform evaluates a hypothetical bank's investment in strengthening its security, specifically its connections with other companies.
They're third-party APIs, right?
Against the threat of malware.
Right. So our goal in this deep dive is to really extract the essential principles and the key ways of thinking that help you determine if a risk mitigation investment is a sound decision.
And more than that, equip you with the tools to effectively communicate that value.
Yeah, to anyone who needs to understand it. By the end, you'll have, hopefully, a clearer perspective on how to assess these kinds of investments.
Okay, so where should we start?
Okay, let's unpack this. One of the first concepts the video introduces is access value probability. In simple terms, what does that tell us about an investment?
Well, think of access value probability like this.
Hmm.
It's essentially the chance, the likelihood that the good things an investment does to reduce risk,
The benefits.
right, the benefits, will outweigh all the costs involved.
Right.
So making it, maintaining it over the long haul.
So it's about whether the upside is likely to beat the total effort put in.
Exactly.
The video used a relatable example for this, phishing training for employees. Apparently that one came out with a lower access value probability.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you paint a picture of what that looked like in their analysis?
Certainly. They showed a visual, an exceedance curve of excess value.
Okay.
And for the phishing training, this suggested there was about an 80% likelihood that the reduction in risk from, successful phishing attacks, right, would be greater than the total cost of setting up and running that training program.
So for someone deciding, that 80% gives a tangible sense of the probability of getting a positive return in terms of reduced risk anyway.
80%, that's a really concrete way to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it moves beyond just like hoping for better security.
It gives you a real sense of the chances of that hope becoming reality. Okay. Now, another angle they explored was net benefit per technical hours. Why measure that?
Well, that metric focuses on how efficiently your technical team's time is being used.
Okay.
It looks at the return you get, the risk reduction return, for every hour your technical staff spends on a specific mitigation activity.
Right, so that becomes really important when you have limited resources.
Exactly. Like a small security team or maybe a tight budget for hiring specialists. It helps you prioritize where their time will have the biggest impact.
Right, and the video highlighted a couple of key ways to interpret this. It could help make a case for expanding your team, or maybe help you decide if it makes more sense to bring in outside help.
Precisely. If the net benefit per technical hour is high for a certain activity, you can argue, look, adding more technical staff here would be a valuable investment.
Makes sense.
But on the other hand, if finding or, affording in-house expertise is tough,
Yeah.
this metric can help you evaluate whether hiring external specialists for specific tasks would be a cost-effective way to reduce risk. It's all about getting the most bang for your buck in terms of technical effort.
Okay, so those are some of the broader ways to think about evaluation. Now let's zoom in on the specific investment they analyzed, that program, to boost the security of third-party APIs against malware. What did their analysis show there?
Okay, so for that third-party API security program, the analysis showed a very high access value probability. It's around 91%.
91%, wow.
Yeah. So simply put, this strongly indicated that the investment was highly likely to generate significant benefits in reducing malware risk through those connections.
Making it seem like a very worthwhile investment from that angle.
Absolutely.
Interestingly, though, they also pointed out that a probability that high could suggest something else about the bank's situation.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That there might be a pretty significant underlying weakness there.
Exactly.
That's a really insightful point. I mean, while a high probability of success is generally good,
Yeah.
an exceptionally high one could imply that the existing security in that specific area is, well, quite weak.
Which means even a focused investment could lead to a large risk reduction, hence the high probability.
Right. It adds another layer of understanding beyond just the positive outcome.
Okay. Now, when they started talking about return analytics, they brought up net present value, or NPC. For someone maybe not familiar, how does that help here with risk investments?
Okay, so think of NPV as a way to get a handle on the total expected financial benefit of a risk reduction investment.
Over its entire lifespan.
Yeah, but it also cleverly takes into account that money today is worth more than the same amount later on.
Yeah.
The time value of money.
Right.
The video mentioned an average annual risk mitigation of $407 million for this API security program.
Which sounds huge.
It does. And what's fascinating is that this number isn't just a simple calculation. It's derived from something called Monte Carlo simulations.
Right. And as they explained it, a Monte Carlo simulation is like running the same risk scenario over and over again, thousands of times, each time with slightly different possible outcomes to see the most likely range of results if you make the investment versus if you don't.
Exactly. By running all these simulations, you get a much more comprehensive picture of the potential financial impact.
Not just a single best guess.
No, you get a range of possibilities and an average expected outcome. This gives decision makers a much more robust understanding of the potential value.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting for me. They emphasize the power of seeing risk mitigation benefits organized hierarchically. Why is that so valuable?
Well, visualizing how an investment in one specific area, like securing those service provider APIs against malware, can actually reduce various risks right across the entire organization. It really reveals how interconnected these risks often are.
So a focused investment can have a ripple effect.
Precisely. Mitigating threats you might not have initially considered. And this is key for getting buy-in from people on the business side.
Because generally speaking, business leaders care more about the big picture risks, right? Things like losing customer trust or facing fines.
Exactly.
Rather than the nitty-gritty technical details of, say, one type of malware.
Precisely. They care about how security impacts the bottom line, the overall health of the business. And the video highlighted that if your risk analysis only looks at a very narrow specific threat in isolation,
You miss things.
you're likely to significantly underestimate the total benefits of your security investments because you're just not seeing these broader impacts.
They gave a really striking example of that, didn't they? An investment aimed at preventing sensitive client data loss.
Yes. The direct intended benefit was estimated around, what, $138 million?
Something like that. But when they looked at the bigger picture, how it strengthened overall security.
The total risk reduction across the organization jumped to $407 million.
That's a massive difference in perceived value.
It really underscores how a narrow focus can lead you to undervalue critical security measures. By presenting this kind of hierarchical view,
You paint a more complete picture.
exactly, a much more complete picture of the ROI, making it easier to justify the spending and get the resources you need.
And it helps avoid overwhelming stakeholders with technical jargon while still showing the significant widespread benefits.
Right.
And it's not just about different types of data loss, is it? They also mention how improving defenses against one threat, like malware on APIs.
Can actually make you stronger against other kinds of attacks, too. Yeah, they called it the threat mitigation perspective.
So improving proactive capabilities in one spot might close off pathways.
Or strengthen defenses that could be exploited by other attack types, yeah. It's about building a more resilient overall security posture. One investment, multiple positive outcomes.
Okay. Now, the video also went back to those simulation distributions, using the exceedance curves again. What's the key insight there?
Well, the exceedance curves, coming from those Monte Carlo simulations, they show us the range of possible outcomes.
Yeah, not just the average.
Exactly. While the average expected benefit might be significant, these curves also show that in some, less severe scenarios, the costs of the investment could potentially outweigh the benefits.
So it's not always a guaranteed win in every single simulated future.
No. It's crucial to look at the entire range, best case, worst case, everything in between, to get a realistic understanding of the uncertainty involved.
And the potential variability in the return. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And this directly connects to the idea of risk tolerance, doesn't it? How do these investments help an organization stay within acceptable risk levels?
Precisely. I mean, the ultimate goal of risk management is keeping potential losses within a range the organization is comfortable with. That's their risk tolerance. Risk mitigation investments aim to shift what they call the loss exceedings curve. Basically, the probability of losses going above certain limits,
Right.
downwards and to the left. Ideally, bringing it below that risk tolerance level.
So by making these investments, you're reducing the likelihood of those really high impact, unacceptable loss scenarios.
Exactly. You're shifting the distribution towards lower potential losses.
They also use some visuals for this, like bubble charts, showing how proactive investments reduce the likelihood, the frequency of risk events. How did those work?
Oh, yeah. The bubble charts are really effective for visualizing the impact of proactive measures.
Mm-hmm.
In the ManageXValue example,
Mm-hmm.
because the API security program was designed to prevent attacks.
Right, proactive.
The bubbles representing different risk events moved horizontally to the left on the chart when comparing without investment to with investment.
Ah, so leftward movement means less frequent.
Exactly. It clearly showed a reduction in frequency, how often those events were likely to occur. Now, if an investment was focused on minimizing damage after an attack,
Like impact mitigation.
right, then you would have seen the bubbles move vertically downwards, indicating a reduction in impact.
That's a really clear visual distinction.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, they also discussed ranking risks using candle charts, and there was a bit of a surprise there.
Absolutely. A bit of a twist. Initially, malware through third-party APIs looked like a major risk, right?
Yeah, that was the focus.
But after simulating the impact of the new security program, the analysis surprisingly indicated that phishing attacks actually became the more significant remaining risk.
Really? When looking at expected average losses.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. So even though a successful malware attack might have a potentially larger worst-case impact,
Right, represented by the wider candle, maybe?
the simulations suggested that, on average, the expected losses from phishing were now likely to be higher after those API security improvements were factored in.
Precisely. The candle chart showed a broader potential impact range for malware, but the overall expected value of losses from phishing ended up greater.
Wow. That really highlights how in-depth analysis can sometimes reveal unexpected shifts in your risk landscape.
And help you reprioritize your efforts, yeah.
Hmm.
They even noted this ranking could change again if you were solely focused on, say, those rare, catastrophic black swan events.
It's a great example of how data can uncover unforeseen priorities, a real aha moment.
Definitely.
Finally, they showed how the investment impacted their actual risk inventory. What did we learn from that part?
Well, by filtering down their pretty large risk inventory to focus just on malware and third-party APIs, the target of the investment.
Which was like 126 scenarios out of over 1,000.
Something like that, yeah. They demonstrated a clear, measurable improvement in their proactive security capabilities right there.
So the investment essentially strengthened their defenses in that specific area.
Exactly, bringing their security posture closer to the level of the threat. They even quantified the benefit for a particular risk scenario,
Oh, yeah.
showing a tangible decrease, I think it was 3 points, in both the likelihood score and the overall risk score, directly because of the investment.
So that provides a really concrete illustration of the technical impact.
Absolutely, very tangible.
Okay, so bringing it all together then, what are the key things to keep in mind when we need to communicate the value of these risk mitigation investments?
Well, firstly, using that hierarchical view we talked about, illustrating the broader organizational benefits is just essential for getting buy-in from business stakeholders.
Right, showing the big picture.
And secondly, remember that the investment evaluation process itself often directly calculates the difference in risk levels with and without the investment.
Ah, so
Yeah.
that comparison is powerful.
Incredibly powerful, yeah. It's a very direct way to communicate the value proposition.
Okay, so to quickly recap, we've looked at how metrics like access value probability and net benefit per technical hours help us assess an investment's potential.
Yeah.
We've seen the power of visualizing risk across the organization to understand how interconnected threats are and the full scope of an investment's impact.
Right. Avoiding that narrow view.
And we've highlighted the importance of comparing potential risk with and without an investment to truly grasp its benefit.
Exactly. You should now have a pretty solid framework for not only evaluating the worth of a risk mitigation investment.
But also for communicating that worth clearly and persuasively.
That's the idea.
Great. And on that note, here's something to think about for everyone listening. Consider how these principles of evaluating and communicating investment benefits this focus on likelihood, impact, the wider consequences.
Mhm.
How could that be relevant in your own field?
Yeah.
Even if it's not cybersecurity or finance, where else in your work or maybe even your personal life could this kind of analytical approach help you make decisions?
They explain their value more clearly.
Exactly. Thanks for diving deep with us.